The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 1883, and Patricia Dawson knew the moment she read it that her life was about to shatter like dropped china on a hardwood floor. Changed my mind, stop, cannot marry, plain woman, stop, do not come, stop. She stood in the cramped boarding house hallway in Boston, her fingers trembling as they held the thin paper, and felt every cruel word her stepmother had ever spoken settle into her bones like winter cold that would never leave. She had already paid for the train ticket west to Saint Elmo, Colorado, had already given up her position at the textile mill, had already endured the pitying looks of the other girls when she told them she was going to be married. The man, Silas Hutchinson, owned a mercantile in the mining town and had sent for a bride through a matrimonial agency after seeing her photograph and reading her letters. She had been honest about her appearance, had never claimed beauty, but apparently the reality of marrying someone the agency described as plain-featured but of good character had proven too much for his aspirations. Patricia sat on her narrow bed and looked at her reflection in the small mirror propped on the washstand. Mousy brown hair that would not hold a curl, gray eyes set a bit too wide, a nose that was slightly crooked from when she had fallen as a child, a mouth that was neither full nor particularly small. She was not hideous, she told herself. She was simply unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of woman people's eyes passed over in search of something more interesting to look at. But she had nowhere else to go. Her father had died 2 years prior. Her stepmother had made it abundantly clear that Patricia was no longer welcome once she turned 21, and the boarding house wanted their rent. She had exactly enough money for food for perhaps 2 weeks if she was very careful. The train ticket was non-refundable. Patricia made her decision in the gray light of that autumn morning. She would go to Saint Elmo anyway. Perhaps she could find work there. Perhaps the mountain town would offer opportunities that Boston did not. At the very least, she would not have to endure the humiliation of staying in a city where everyone knew she had been rejected by a man who had never even met her. The journey west took 5 days, and with each mile, Patricia felt herself becoming smaller, more uncertain. The other passengers were boisterous miners heading back to the Colorado mountains, families seeking new fortunes, a few stern-faced businessmen. She kept to herself, ate the bread and cheese she had packed sparingly, and watched the landscape change from the familiar forests of the east to the endless plains and finally to the dramatic peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Saint Elmo sat at nearly 10,000 feet in elevation, a town carved out of the wilderness by determination and the lure of silver. When Patricia stepped off the train, the thin air made her gasp, and the October wind cut through her worn traveling coat like it was made of paper. The town was a collection of wooden buildings clinging to the mountainside, with the sound of stamp mills echoing through the valley, and the constant movement of ore wagons rattling down the muddy Main Street. She stood on the platform with her single trunk and carpet bag, watching families reunite and miners head toward the saloons, and wondered what on earth she had been thinking. A man walked past her, glanced at her face, and looked away quickly. A woman in a fine dress actually sniffed and turned her back. Patricia felt the familiar burn of invisibility, of being assessed and found wanting in the span of a heartbeat. "Miss Dawson." A reedy voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. She turned to see a thin man in spectacles and a merchant's apron approaching. Her stomach dropped. Silas Hutchinson. He looked at her with barely concealed disappointment, his eyes taking in her plain features and simple dress. "I thought perhaps you would not come after my telegram." "I had already paid for the ticket," Patricia said, lifting her chin despite the shame heating her cheeks. "I had nowhere else to go." "I see." He shifted uncomfortably. Well, I cannot marry you. I am sorry, but I have expectations and you do not meet them. However, I am not a cruel man. There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen on Silver Street. I will pay for 1 week's lodging. After that, you will need to find your own way. The dismissal was absolute. Patricia nodded because what else could she do? She watched him signal to a boy to help with her trunk, followed them through the muddy streets to a neat building with a hand-painted sign, and accepted the key to a small room with a view of the mountains. Sila's paid Mrs. Chen, a kind-faced Chinese woman who spoke careful English, and then he left without another word. Patricia sat on the edge of the bed and did not cry. She had learned years ago that tears changed nothing. Instead, she unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and went downstairs to ask Mrs. Chen about employment opportunities. Not much for women here, Mrs. Chen said gently, her dark eyes sympathetic. Saloon work, but that is hard. Laundry work, but many already do that. Can you cook? Yes, fairly well. Can you sew? Yes, Mrs. Chen considered. The boarding house could use help. I can offer room and board and $2 a week. It is not much. It was something. Patricia accepted immediately. She spent the rest of that day learning the routines of the boarding house, which catered mostly to minors and the occasional traveling salesman. She cooked, she cleaned, she changed linens and kept the fires going in the stoves. Mrs. Chen was a fair employer, and the work, while exhausting, was honest. 3 days later, Patricia was at the general store purchasing supplies for the boarding house when she overheard the conversation that made her understand just how thoroughly Silas Hutchinson had humiliated her. Did you see that mail-order bride Hutchinson sent away? A woman's voice carried over the pickle barrel. Plain as a mud fence. I do not blame him one bit for refusing her. I heard she looked even worse than her photograph, another woman replied with a laugh. Imagine traveling all that way only to be rejected at first sight. Well, what did she expect? A man like Silas could have his pick if he wanted. Why would he settle for someone so thoroughly unremarkable? Patricia stood frozen in the aisle, a can of baking powder in her hand, and felt the words cut deeper than any her stepmother had ever wielded. She paid for her purchases with shaking hands and walked back to the boarding house with her eyes fixed on the ground. That evening, she was in the kitchen kneading bread dough with perhaps more force than necessary when Mrs. Chen came in with a tall man following behind her. Miss Dawson, this is Mr. Travis Calloway. He will be staying with us for a time. Patricia looked up and felt her breath catch in a way that had nothing to do with the altitude. The man was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of the summer sky she remembered from childhood. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty from travel, with a battered hat in his hands and dark hair that needed cutting. But it was not his appearance that stopped her. It was the way he looked at her, really looked, as if she was actually there and worth seeing. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble with a Texas drawl softening the edges. "Pleased to make your acquaintance." "Mr. Calloway," Patricia managed, acutely aware of the flour on her hands and the plain apron covering her plain dress. She waited for his eyes to slide away in disinterest, but they did not. Instead, he smiled, and the expression transformed his weathered face into something approaching handsome. "Travis, please." Mr. Calloway was my father, and we did not get along well enough for me to want to be reminded of him. He set his saddlebags down carefully. "I am here looking to buy cattle. Heard there might be some good stock in the area. Mrs. Chen showed him to his room, and Patricia returned to her bread with her heart beating strangely fast. She told herself not to be foolish, that a kind look meant nothing, that she had learned her lesson about hope and expectations. But when Travis came down for dinner that evening, he sat at the long table with the miners and salesmen and made easy conversation. And when Patricia brought out the stew and biscuits, he thanked her warmly and told her it smelled better than anything he had eaten in months. She brushed off the compliment, knowing it was just politeness, but throughout the meal she felt his eyes on her, thoughtful and curious. After dinner, she was washing dishes when he appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. "Miss Dawson, I wondered if I might ask you something." Patricia's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Of course. I am new to the area and looking to learn about the local ranches. Mrs. Chen mentioned you have been exploring the town a bit. Would you happen to know which direction the Riverside Ranch lies?" It was a simple question, and Patricia answered it as best she could, though her knowledge of the surrounding area was limited. Travis listened attentively, then thanked her and turned to leave before pausing. "That was a fine meal you prepared. You have a real talent for cooking." "It was just stew," Patricia said, confused by the compliment. "Maybe so, but I have eaten a lot of stew in my time and yours was made with care. That makes a difference." He smiled again, that warm expression that made something in her chest tighten, and then he was gone. Patricia finished the dishes in a daze. She told herself not to read anything into his kindness, that he was simply a polite man, that she was setting herself up for disappointment. But that night, lying in her small room listening to the sounds of the mountain town settling into darkness, she allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to be seen by someone like Travis Calloway. The next morning, Patricia woke before dawn as usual and started breakfast for the boarders. She was frying bacon when Travis came downstairs, his hair damp from washing, his shirt clean but faded from many launderings. "You are up early," he observed, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the stove. "The work requires it," Patricia said, focusing on the bacon to avoid looking at him directly. In the early morning light filtering through the window, he seemed even more solid and real, and she did not trust herself not to stare. "I grew up on a ranch in Texas," Travis said, leaning against the counter in a way that suggested he was settling in for conversation. "We were always up before the sun. I do not mind it. There is something peaceful about the world before everyone else wakes up." "Yes," Patricia agreed softly. "It is the only time that feels like it belongs just to me." He looked at her with those steady blue eyes. "I imagine working in a boarding house does not leave much time for yourself. It is honest work and Mrs. Chen is kind. I am grateful for it. How did you come to be in Saint Elmo?" The question was casual, but Patricia felt herself tense anyway. She could lie, could make up some story, but there seemed little point when the whole town apparently knew her shame. "I came to be married," she said, flipping the bacon with more attention than it required. "The gentleman changed his mind when he saw me. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go." The silence that followed made her wish she had lied after all, but when she risked a glance at Travis, his expression was not pitying. It was angry. "The gentleman," he said carefully, "sounds like a fool." Patricia nearly dropped the fork. "I beg your pardon. Any man who would judge a woman solely on her appearance and break a promise he made is not worth your time or your sorrow," Travis said firmly. "You are better off without him." "You do not understand," Patricia said, surprised to feel tears pricking at her eyes. "I am plain. Everyone knows it. I have always known it. He wanted someone beautiful and I am not." Travis set down his coffee cup and moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could smell the soap he had used and the leather of his boots. "Miss Dawson, may I speak plainly?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "I have been all over this territory. I have seen painted ladies in saloons and proper ladies in church, and I have learned that beauty is not what folks think it is. It is not about having the right features or the right hair or the right anything. It is about the light in someone's eyes when they talk about something they love, the way they move through the world, the kindness they show when they think no one is watching. He paused, and his voice went quieter. You have been nothing but gracious since I arrived, working yourself near to exhaustion to make sure everyone here is fed and comfortable. I have watched you smile at Mrs. Chen when you think no one sees, and I have seen you slip extra biscuits to the young miner who looks half-starved. And if you want my honest opinion, I think you are far prettier than you give yourself credit for. Patricia stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. You do not have to say such things to make me feel better. I am not, Travis said simply. I am telling you the truth as I see it. The man who rejected you is a fool, and someday he is going to realize what he lost. Before Patricia could respond, Mrs. Chen bustled into the kitchen with her usual morning energy, and the moment shattered. Travis returned to his coffee, and Patricia returned to her cooking, but something had shifted between them. Some invisible line had been crossed, and she could not seem to catch her breath properly. Over the following days, Travis made it his habit to appear in the kitchen in the early mornings, and they would talk while Patricia prepared breakfast. He told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about working his way across the West learning everything he could about cattle and horses. She told him, hesitantly at first and then with growing confidence, about her childhood in Boston, about her father who had been a clerk and had taught her to read and write and do figures, about the books she had loved before her stepmother sold them to pay for new curtains. You miss it, Travis observed one morning. The reading. I do, Patricia admitted, but books are expensive and I have no money for such luxuries. That afternoon, Travis returned from town with a package wrapped in brown paper. He found Patricia in the dining room polishing the table and held it out to her. I saw this at the Mercantile and thought you might like it. Patricia unwrapped the paper with trembling fingers and found a copy of Jane Eyre, the pages crisp and new. I cannot accept this, she whispered, even as her fingers caressed the cover reverently. It is too much. It is a book, Travis said gently, and you will get far more joy from it than I would. Please take it. Consider it a thank you for all the fine meals. She wanted to refuse, knew she should refuse, but the temptation was too great. Thank you, she said, and the words felt wholly inadequate for the gift he had given her. Not just the book, but the fact that he had listened, had remembered, had cared enough to do something about it. That evening, after her work was done, Patricia sat in her small room and read by candlelight until her eyes grew heavy. For the first time since arriving in Saint Elmo, she felt something other than shame and despair. She felt hopeful, and it terrified her. Travis continued his search for cattle, riding out to the various ranches in the area, and returning each evening to the boarding house with updates on his progress. He had found some promising stock at the Riverside Ranch and was negotiating a fair price. He expected to have the deal finalized within the week, and then he would need to drive the cattle back to Texas. The thought of him leaving made Patricia's chest ache in a way she did not want to examine too closely. She had known him for less than 2 weeks, and yet he had become the best part of her days. She looked forward to their morning conversations, to the way he smiled at her over dinner, to the feeling of being seen and valued that she had never experienced before. On Sunday, the boarding house was quiet. Most of the miners were sleeping off Saturday night's drinking, and Mrs. Chen had gone to visit friends in the Chinese community at the edge of town. Patricia was in the kitchen making bread when Travis appeared, dressed in clean clothes with his hair neatly combed. Miss Dawson, I wondered if you might have some free time this afternoon, he said, and there was something nervous in his manner that Patricia had not seen before. I thought perhaps you might like to take a walk. The autumn colors are at their peak, and it seems a shame to miss them." Patricia looked down at her flour-dusted hands, at her plain work dress, and wanted to say yes more than she had wanted anything in a long time. But doubt crept in, insidious and familiar. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked quietly. "Is it pity?" Travis stepped into the kitchen and took her flour-covered hand in his calloused one, apparently unconcerned about the mess. "Patricia," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I am asking you to take a walk with me because I enjoy your company, because I think you are intelligent and kind and far stronger than you realize. Because when I look at you, I see someone remarkable and I want to spend time with you. Is that acceptable?" Her heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "Yes," she whispered. "I would like that very much." She cleaned up quickly, changed into her better dress, which was still plain but at least not covered in flour, and met Travis at the front door. He offered her his arm, and they walked out into the crisp October afternoon. Saint Elmo was beautiful in the fall. The aspen trees had turned brilliant gold, and the mountains rose dramatically against the impossibly blue sky. Travis led her up a trail that climbed above the town, pointing out landmarks and telling her stories about the places he had been. Patricia listened and laughed and felt something inside her that had been locked away for years begin to cautiously unfurl. They reached a viewpoint that overlooked the valley, and Travis stopped, his expression turning serious. "I need to tell you something," he said. "I leave in 3 days. The cattle deal is finalized and I need to get the herd back to Texas before the weather turns." Patricia had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a blow. "I understand," she said, working to keep her voice steady. "You have your life and I have mine here." "That is just it," Travis said urgently. "I do not want to leave you here. Patricia, I know this is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me want to be better, to build something lasting. Come with me to Texas. Marry me. I am not a wealthy man, but I have a small ranch and prospects for more. I will work hard to give you a good life, I swear it." Patricia felt dizzy, and not from the altitude. "You cannot possibly want to marry me," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Travis, you could have your pick of women. You are kind and handsome and decent, and I am just plain. People have been telling me that my entire life, and it is true. I saw the way those women looked at you in town, the way they smiled and preened. You could have someone beautiful." Travis cupped her face in his hands, gently forcing her to meet his eyes. "I want you to listen to me very carefully," he said, his voice low and intense. "When I look at you, I see beauty. Real beauty, not the kind that fades with age or circumstance, but the kind that comes from the soul. I see it in the way you care for others, in your strength and your resilience, in your smile when you think no one is watching. I see it in your eyes when you talk about books, in your hands when you cook, in the set of your shoulders when you face another day despite everything that has tried to break you." Tears were streaming down Patricia's face now, hot and fast. "How can you see all that when no one else ever has?" "Because I was actually looking," Travis said simply. "Because I see you, Patricia Dawson, all of you, and you are the most beautiful thing here." She sobbed then, something breaking open inside her, years of pain and rejection and loneliness pouring out. Travis pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, his hand stroking her hair, his voice murmuring soothing words she could not quite make out over the sound of her own weeping. When she finally quieted, exhausted and drained, she pulled back enough to look up at him. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am afraid to believe this is real, that you truly want me. I am afraid that you will wake up one day and realize you made a mistake. Then let me prove it to you, Travis said. "Every single day for the rest of our lives, if that is what it takes." "Marry me, Patricia. Come to Texas with me. Let me show you what it is like to be loved the way you deserve." Patricia thought about her small room at the boarding house, about Mrs. Chen's kindness that was not quite home, about the women who whispered behind their hands when she walked past. She thought about Boston and her stepmother's cruelty, about Silas Hutchinson's rejection, about all the years she had spent believing she was unworthy of love or happiness. And then she thought about Travis's smile in the morning light, about the way he listened when she talked, about the book he had bought her, and the way he held her hand without caring about the flower. She thought about the possibility of a life where she was seen and valued, where she could be herself without apology, where love was not something to be earned through beauty but something freely given. "Yes," she said, and the word was both a whisper and a shout. "Yes, I will marry you." Travis let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the mountains and spun her around until she was laughing and dizzy and more alive than she had ever felt. When he set her down, he kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Patricia understood for the first time what all those novels had been trying to describe. They walked back to town hand in hand, making plans. They would be married the next day by the circuit preacher who happened to be in town. Mrs. Chen would be a witness, and they would leave for Texas the morning after, traveling with the cattle drive. It would be a hard journey, Travis warned. Weeks on the trail with the cattle, camping under the stars and dealing with weather and terrain. But Patricia found she did not care. She had faced hard things before, and now she would not be facing them alone. That evening, Travis went to speak with the preacher and Patricia told Mrs. Chen her news. The older woman hugged her tightly, tears in her dark eyes. "I am happy for you," she said. "Mr. Calloway is a good man, I can see it. You deserve good things, Miss Dawson." "Thank you," Patricia said, emotion thick in her throat, "for everything. For taking me in when I had nowhere to go, for your kindness. I will never forget it." "You send letters," Mrs. Chen insisted. "Tell me of your life in Texas. I want to know you are happy." Patricia promised she would. She packed her few belongings that night, her hands shaking with nervousness and excitement. She had no wedding dress, but her better dress would have to suffice. She did not care about the trappings anyway. All that mattered was Travis and the life they would build together. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Patricia dressed carefully, pinning her hair up in a simple style and wishing desperately that she looked different, more like a proper bride. But when she came downstairs and saw Travis's face light up at the sight of her, all her doubts fled. "You are beautiful," he said, and this time she believed him. They were married in the small church at the edge of town, with Mrs. Chen and the preacher as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when Travis slid a plain gold ring onto her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, Patricia felt tears slip down her cheeks. She made her own vows with a steady voice, promising to stand by him through whatever life brought. And when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Travis kissed her with such tenderness that her knees went weak. They spent their wedding night in Travis's room at the boarding house, which felt both scandalous and right now that they were legally married. Travis was patient and gentle, taking his time to show Patricia that she was cherished, that her body was something to be celebrated rather than merely tolerated. She had been nervous, afraid she would disappoint him, but he whispered praise against her skin and made her feel like the most desired woman in the world. Afterwards, lying in his arms in the darkness, Patricia traced the calluses on his hands and marveled at how much her life had changed in just 2 weeks. "Are you happy?" Travis asked softly. "I did not know I could be this happy," Patricia admitted. "It frightens me a little how much I have come to depend on you." "Then we will depend on each other," Travis said, kissing her forehead. "That is what marriage is, I think. Building something together stronger than either of us could be alone." They left Saint Elmo at dawn the next morning. Patricia said goodbye to Mrs. Chen with promises to write, and they rode out to the riverside ranch where Travis's newly purchased cattle were waiting. There were 30 head of good quality stock, and Travis had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the drive back to Texas. The men, grizzled cowboys named Pete and Sam, eyed Patricia with skepticism when Travis introduced her as his wife, but they were polite enough. The journey south and east toward Texas was like nothing Patricia had ever experienced. They traveled slowly, letting the cattle graze and rest, moving steadily through the Colorado wilderness and down onto the high plains. Patricia rode beside Travis on a gentle mare he had purchased for her, learning to sit a horse properly and manage the long days in the saddle. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache, and her hands blistered from holding the reins. But Travis was endlessly patient, teaching her what she needed to know and making sure she was comfortable each night when they made camp. They slept under the stars, and Travis would hold her close in their bedroll, pointing out constellations and telling her stories. Pete and Sam gradually warmed to her, especially after she took over the cooking duties and proved to be far better at it than either of them. She learned to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead and biscuits that could be cooked over an open fire, and the men's initial skepticism turned to grudging appreciation. One night, about a week into the journey, they made camp near a stream in the Kansas grasslands. The cattle were settled, the fire was crackling cheerfully, and Patricia was cleaning up after dinner when she overheard Pete talking to Travis. "Never thought I would see you get married, boss," Pete said, his voice carrying in the still evening air. "And I got to admit, when you first introduced your wife, I figured you had made a mistake. No offense to the lady, but she did not look like she could handle trail life." Patricia froze, waiting for the familiar sting of judgment. "But I was wrong," Pete continued. "She has got more grit than half the men I have worked with, and she does not complain even when I know she has to be hurting. You chose well." "I know I did," Travis said, and Patricia could hear the smile in his voice. "She is stronger than she thinks she is. I am just grateful she gave me a chance." Patricia returned to the fire with her heart full, and when Travis reached for her hand, she held on tight. Each day of the journey, she felt herself growing stronger, more confident. She learned to help with the cattle, to anticipate problems before they arose, to read the weather and the land. Travis taught her to shoot a rifle, insisting she know how to protect herself, and she proved to be a decent shot once she got over her nervousness. They crossed into the Texas Panhandle in early November, the landscape changing to rolling grasslands beneath enormous skies. Travis grew more animated as they neared his ranch, pointing out landmarks and telling her about his neighbors. "It is not much," he warned her repeatedly. "Just a small cabin and a barn, a few hundred acres of grazing land. But it is ours, and we will build it into something better." They arrived at the Cowboy ranch on an afternoon when the sun was slanting golden across the grass. The cabin was indeed small, a simple log structure with a stone chimney, but it was well built and solid. There was a barn for the horses, a corral for the cattle, and a small vegetable garden that had been carefully tended before Travis left for Colorado. "It is perfect," Patricia said, and meant it. This would be her home, the first place that had ever truly belonged to her. Pete and Sam helped them get the cattle settled, then headed off to their own places with promises to help Travis expand the herd in the spring. Patricia explored her new home, touching the simple furniture Travis had built himself, the iron cookstove that was far better than cooking over an open fire, the bed frame waiting for a mattress. That night, They unpacked the wagon and made the cabin into a home. Travis had stopped at a general store during the journey and purchased supplies, including fabric for curtains and a real feather mattress. Patricia hung the curtains while he assembled the bed, and when they were done, the cabin felt cozy and welcoming despite its small size. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," Travis said, pulling her into his arms. "I like the sound of that," Patricia murmured against his chest. "Patricia Calloway, it sounds like someone new, someone strong." "You were always strong," Travis corrected gently. "You just needed the chance to prove it." They settled into the rhythms of ranch life. Patricia took over the domestic duties, cooking and cleaning and tending the garden, while Travis worked with the cattle and horses. The work was hard and constant, but Patricia found satisfaction in it that she had never experienced in Boston or even at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. This was her home, built by her own hands alongside her husband, and every small improvement felt like a victory. Winter came early to the Texas Panhandle, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. Patricia learned to preserve food, to keep the cabin warm against the bitter temperatures, to care for the animals when the weather was too harsh for them to forage. Travis taught her to ride properly, and she became confident enough to help him check on the cattle even in bad weather. They visited with their nearest neighbors, the Morrison family, who lived about 5 miles away. Mrs. Morrison was a weathered woman in her 40s with 6 children, and a wealth of practical advice about surviving on the frontier. She took Patricia under her wing, teaching her how to churn butter and render lard and dozens of other skills that Patricia had never needed in the city. "You are lucky in your husband," Mrs. Morrison said one day when Patricia had ridden over to borrow some sugar. "Travis Calloway has always been a good man, honest and hardworking, and the way he looks at you, well, that is something special." Patricia felt herself blush. "I am the lucky one. He could have had anyone, and he chose me." Mrs. Morrison gave her a shrewd look. "Seems to me he chose exactly who he wanted. Do not sell yourself short, girl. You are making a good life here, and that takes a special kind of person." As winter deepened, Patricia and Travis grew even closer. The long evenings by the fire gave them time to talk, to share stories and dreams, to plan for the future. Travis wanted to expand the ranch, to build a larger herd and eventually buy more land. Patricia wanted to start a family, though she was terrified of childbirth and all its dangers. "We will face it together when the time comes," Travis assured her. "But there is no rush. I am happy with just the two of us for now." Christmas came, and Patricia made their first holiday together special despite their limited resources. She cooked a feast with a chicken from Mrs. Morrison and precious dried apples made into a pie. Travis surprised her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal and a pen and ink. "For your thoughts," he said, "and maybe someday for writing down stories of your own. You have always loved books, so perhaps you might like to create one." Patricia was overwhelmed. She had never considered herself capable of writing anything worthwhile, but the gift touched her deeply. She started that very night, writing about her journey from Boston to Saint Elmo, about the man who had rejected her, and the man who had saved her, about the life she was building in Texas. The new year of 1884 arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. They were snowed in for a week in January, and Patricia learned what it meant to be truly isolated. But she did not mind. She and Travis were warm and well supplied, and the forced closeness only deepened their bond. They talked about everything and nothing, made love in the warmth of their bed while the wind howled outside, and played cards by lamplight in the evenings. When the thaw finally came in late February, they emerged to find that they had lost 2 cattle to the cold, but the rest of the herd had survived. Travis was philosophical about the loss. "It happens," he said. "We will rebuild." That is what ranching is, persistence in the face of setbacks. Spring arrived like a benediction, the grasslands greening and the wildflowers blooming in riotous color. Patricia planted a larger garden, determined to grow enough vegetables to see them through the next winter. Travis began the process of expanding the herd, trading work with neighbors to help with spring branding and castration. In April, Patricia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain, then told Travis the news one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I am expecting a child," she said, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I think it will come in late autumn or early winter." Travis went very still, then let out a shout of joy that probably carried to the Morrison place. He swept her into his arms, careful despite his excitement, and she felt tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" she asked, needing to hear it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Travis said, his own eyes bright with moisture. "Patricia, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a partner, and now a child. I am the most fortunate man alive." The pregnancy progressed well, though Patricia dealt with morning sickness that was not limited to mornings and a constant fatigue that made the simplest tasks exhausting. Travis took over more of the household duties, insisting she rest as much as possible. Mrs. Morrison visited regularly, bringing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes from her own children. Summer was brutally hot, and Patricia's growing belly made the heat even more oppressive. She moved slowly, conserving her energy, and Travis made sure she drank plenty of water and stayed in the shade as much as possible. Despite the discomfort, Patricia found herself marveling at the changes in her body, at the life growing inside her. In August, Travis rode to the nearest town and returned with supplies and a surprise: a beautiful wooden cradle he had commissioned from a carpenter. It was made of smooth, polished pine, with rockers that moved soundlessly and intricate carvings of horses and cattle along the sides. "It is beautiful," Patricia whispered, running her hands over the wood. "Our baby will sleep here, safe and loved." "Just like their mother," Travis said, kissing her gently. As autumn arrived, Patricia began to feel the baby move, strange flutters that soon became unmistakable kicks. Travis would place his hand on her belly in the evenings, his face alight with wonder when he felt the child moving. They talked endlessly about names, about whether it would be a boy or a girl, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know they are loved unconditionally," Patricia said one night. "I want them to grow up confident and kind, knowing their worth is not determined by their appearance or what others think of them." "They will," Travis promised. "Because they will have you as their mother, and you will teach them everything they need to know about strength and resilience and grace." In late October, nearly a year to the day after Patricia had arrived in Saint Elmo, she went into labor. Travis sent for Mrs. Morrison, who arrived with her oldest daughter in tow. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Patricia had never known such pain existed, and there were moments when she was certain she would not survive. But Travis stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement and love. And when the baby finally arrived as the sun was setting, a healthy boy with dark hair and a powerful set of lungs, Patricia wept with relief and joy and exhaustion. "You did it," Travis said, his voice choked with emotion as he held his son for the first time. "Patricia, he is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much." They named him Thomas after Patricia's father, and he became the center of their world. Patricia had worried she would not know how to be a mother, having had such a poor example in her stepmother, but she found that love made up for inexperience. She nursed Thomas and rocked him in the beautiful cradle and sang lullabies her father had sung to her as a child. Travis was a devoted father, helping with the baby even when he was exhausted from ranch work. He would walk the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, change diapers without complaint, and stare at his son with an expression of such profound love that it made Patricia's heart ache. The winter of 1884 was easier than the previous one, perhaps because they were more prepared, or perhaps because the joy of their son made every hardship seem manageable. They took turns getting up with Thomas in the night, supported each other through the exhaustion of new parenthood, and marveled at every small milestone. His first smile, the way he tracked movement with his eyes, the strength in his tiny hands. Spring came again, and with it the endless cycle of ranch work. Patricia strapped Thomas to her back in a sling Mrs. Morrison had made and went about her chores, talking to him as she worked. He was a happy baby, curious about everything, and he seemed to thrive in the open air and sunshine. In May, they received their first letter from Mrs. Chen. Patricia had written to her several times over the past year, but mail was slow and unreliable on the frontier. Mrs. Chen's letter was full of news from Saint Elmo. The town was booming with new silver strikes, the boarding house was doing well, and Silas Hutchinson had married a woman from Denver who was reportedly beautiful and utterly useless in every practical sense. "Good riddance," Travis said when Patricia read him that part. "I hope he is miserable." "I do not," Patricia said, surprising herself. "I hope he is happy, actually, because if he had not rejected me, I would never have met you, and I cannot imagine my life without you now." Travis pulled her close, careful not to squish Thomas between them. "You are a better person than I am. I will always be grateful to him for being a fool, but I cannot quite bring myself to wish him well." As Thomas grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Travis's hard work paid off with a steadily growing herd, and they were able to make improvements to the cabin, adding a second room that served as a bedroom for Thomas and eventually, they hoped, for other children. They built a chicken coop and acquired laying hens, and Patricia's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables through the summer and preserved goods for the winter. Life was not without difficulties. They endured droughts and harsh winters, dealt with cattle thieves and predators, and faced the constant financial uncertainties of ranching. But they faced everything together, and their partnership only grew stronger with each challenge overcome. In the spring of 1886, Patricia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born in December, a tiny thing with Patricia's gray eyes and Travis's dark hair. They named her Catherine after Mrs. Chen, whose kindness had helped Patricia survive those first difficult weeks in Saint Elmo. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would bring her his favorite toys and pat her head gently, and Travis and Patricia would exchange smiles over their children's heads, marveling at the family they had created. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and care for the animals. Catherine was quieter, more thoughtful, with a love of stories that reminded Patricia of herself as a child. They added a third child in 1889, another boy they named Daniel, who proved to be the most adventurous of the three, and gave them more than a few scares with his fearless exploration of the ranch. Through it all, Patricia and Travis's love deepened and matured. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together to build not just a ranch but a life, a legacy for their children. Patricia had long since stopped thinking of herself as plain or unworthy. She saw herself reflected in Travis's eyes, in her children's love, in the thriving home she had created. And she understood finally that beauty had never been about her features. It had always been about being seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. One evening in the summer of 1890, 7 years after they had met in Saint Elmo, Patricia and Travis sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. Thomas was teaching Catherine to throw a rope, while Daniel chased chickens with more enthusiasm than skill. "You ever regret it?" Travis asked, reaching for her hand. "Leaving everything you knew, coming to a place so different from where you grew up?" Patricia thought about Boston, about the cold boarding house and her stepmother's cruelty, about the train ride west and the humiliation of Silas Hutchinson's rejection. She thought about the pain and fear and loneliness that had defined so much of her early life. And then she looked at her husband, her children, the ranch they had built together, and smiled. "I regret nothing," she said firmly. "Every difficult moment, every heartbreak, every fear led me here to you, to this life. I would not change a single thing." Travis lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Patricia Calloway. From the moment I saw you in that kitchen, covered in flour and so determined not to let anyone see how much you were hurting, I loved you. And I will love you until the day I die and beyond, if such things are possible." "I love you too," Patricia said, tears stinging her eyes the way they always did when Travis spoke from his heart. "You saved me, Travis. You showed me that I was worth loving, worth seeing. You gave me everything." "No," Travis corrected gently. "We saved each other. We built this together, and we will keep building it together for as long as we have." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The children's laughter rang out across the ranch, a sound that never failed to fill Patricia's heart with joy. She thought about the telegram that had shattered her world 7 years ago, about the words that had cut so deep. "Cannot marry plain woman." She had been called too plain, too unremarkable, too forgettable. But Travis had looked at her and seen something entirely different. He had seen strength and kindness and beauty, and he had loved her not despite her appearance but because of who she was beneath the surface. He had taught her to see herself through his eyes, and in doing so had given her the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that she was enough, exactly as she was. As the years continued to pass, the Calloway Ranch became known throughout the region as a well-run operation with a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealings. Travis and Patricia became respected members of their community, known for their generosity and willingness to help neighbors in need. They survived the financial panic of 1893, droughts and floods, illnesses and accidents, always together, always supporting each other. Their children grew strong and confident, knowing they were loved unconditionally. Thomas eventually took over much of the ranch operation, working alongside his father and learning everything Travis could teach him. Catherine discovered a talent for teaching and opened a small school in their expanded home, educating not just her younger siblings but children from neighboring ranches. Daniel developed a gift with horses and began breeding and training them, adding another income stream to the ranch. In 1895, they received word that Silas Hutchinson had died in a mining accident in Saint Elmo. Patricia felt a pang of sympathy for the man who had rejected her so cruelly, but mostly she felt grateful. His rejection had seemed like the end of her world, but it had actually been the beginning of the life she was meant to live. Mrs. Chen continued to write faithfully, her letters full of news from Colorado and expressions of joy at Patricia's happiness. They invited her to visit in 1897, and the older woman made the journey, staying for 2 months and becoming beloved by the Calloway children, who called her grandmother Chen and begged her for stories of the old days in China and the wild mining town of Saint Elmo. On their 15th wedding anniversary in November 1898, Travis commissioned a photographer from the nearest town to come take a family portrait. Patricia protested that she was too old, that her face showed the lines of years spent in the Texas sun and wind, but Travis was insistent. "I want to remember this moment," he said. "Our family, all together, healthy and happy. I want the children to have this image of what we built together." The photograph showed the Calloway family standing in front of their ranch house, which had been expanded several times over the years and was now a comfortable home with multiple bedrooms, a proper parlor, and even a small library that Patricia had slowly filled with books. Travis stood tall and proud, his arm around Patricia, who held their youngest, a daughter named Rose, born in 1892. Thomas, now 14 and nearly as tall as his father, stood on Travis's other side. Catherine, 12, held Daniel's hand while 8-year-old Rose grinned impishly at the camera. When Patricia saw the finished photograph weeks later, she studied her own image critically and was surprised by what she saw. Not the plain, forgettable girl she had once been, but a woman who looked content, confident, loved. The lines on her face told stories of laughter and hard work and years lived fully. Her eyes were clear and direct, meeting the camera without fear or shame. "You see it now, do not you?" Travis said softly, looking over her shoulder at the photograph. "What I saw that very first day in the boarding house kitchen. You have always been beautiful, Patricia. I am just glad you finally believe it." As the 19th century drew to a close and a new one dawned, the Calloway family continued to thrive. They weathered the challenges of a changing world, new technologies, shifting markets, the gradual taming of the frontier. But some things remained constant: their love for each other, their commitment to the ranch and the life they had built, their place in the community they had helped create. In the spring of 1903, Thomas married the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited young woman named Sarah, who reminded Patricia of herself at that age, full of determination and hidden strength. The wedding was held at the ranch, with neighbors coming from miles around to celebrate, and Patricia cried happy tears as she watched her eldest son pledge his life to the woman he loved. "Our boy is a man now," Travis said that night as they prepared for bed, his voice tinged with both pride and melancholy. "Where did the years go?" "Into building something lasting," Patricia said, taking his hand. "Into raising children who know how to love and work and stand strong in the face of adversity. We did well, Travis. Look at what we created." Catherine followed her brother into marriage 2 years later, wedding the town doctor who had moved to the area and been instantly smitten with the intelligent schoolteacher. Daniel showed no signs of settling down, preferring his horses and his freedom, though Patricia suspected that would change when he met the right woman. Rose was still young, but she was already showing signs of her father's head for business and her mother's compassionate heart. As Patricia and Travis moved into their 40s and then their 50s, they gradually handed over more of the ranch operations to Thomas and his wife, though Travis never quite stopped working entirely. They had been born to the land and the life, and retirement held no appeal for either of them. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch they had built so many years ago, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in impossible colors. They would talk about their children and grandchildren, about the changes they had seen in the world, about the life they had shared. "You remember what you said to me that first day?" Patricia asked one such evening in the summer of 1910. They were in their 50s now, their hair threaded with silver, their bodies marked by decades of hard work. "When I was making breakfast in Mrs. Chen's kitchen, and you told me I was prettier than I gave myself credit for. I remember every moment of that time," Travis said softly. "I remember thinking you were the most interesting woman I had ever met, all that strength and sadness mixed together. I remember wanting to make you smile, to see what you would look like if someone actually saw you the way you deserved to be seen. You told me later that I was the most beautiful thing there," Patricia continued, her voice thick with emotion even after all these years. "In the mountains above Saint Elmo, when you asked me to marry you. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. No one had ever made me feel like I mattered. You did matter. You do matter. You always have." Travis lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over their years together, but which still made her heart flutter. "Patricia, you are the most beautiful thing here in this life I have been blessed to live. Everything good I have, everything that matters, comes from you or through you. Our children, our home, the man I became because you believed in me. All of it traces back to the day you walked into that boarding house kitchen covered in flour and determination." Patricia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him beside her, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and horses and home. She thought about the girl she had been, arriving in Saint Elmo with a broken heart and no hope for the future. She thought about all the people who had looked at her and seen nothing worth their time or attention. She thought about Silas Hutchinson's telegram, those cruel words that had seemed to define her entire existence. "Cannot marry plain woman." And then she thought about Travis, who had looked past the surface and seen her, really seen her, and had loved what he found there. Who had given her not just a home and a family, but a sense of worth and belonging that had transformed her from the inside out. Who had taught her that beauty was not about features or fashion, but about the life you lived, and the love you shared, and the strength you carried in your soul. "I love you," she whispered into the gathering darkness. "More than I have words to express. You gave me everything, Travis. You gave me myself." "No," Travis said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "You gave yourself that gift. I just had the privilege of being there to witness it." They sat together as the stars emerged one by one in the vast Texas sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and real, a testament to years of hard work and shared dreams. From inside the house came the sounds of family. Their daughter Rose playing piano, the voices of Thomas's children asking for bedtime stories, the ordinary, precious sounds of a life well lived. Patricia Calloway, who had once been called too plain to marry, who had traveled west with a broken heart and no prospects, who had been rejected and judged and found wanting by a world that valued the wrong things, closed her eyes and smiled. She had found her place, her purpose, her peace. She had found love in its truest form, and it had transformed everything. The wind whispered through the grasslands, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers, and Patricia knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. It had not been an easy journey, but it had been worth every difficult step. And if someone had asked her in that moment whether she regretted anything, whether she would change her past if she could, she would have said no without hesitation. Because every heartbreak, every rejection, every moment of pain and doubt had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this beautiful, hard-won life. She was not plain. She had never been plain. She was strong and capable and loved, and that made her more beautiful than any arrangement of features ever could. Travis had seen it first, but now she saw it too, reflected in her children's eyes, in the home they had built, in the lines on her face that told the story of a life lived fully and without regret. As the years continued to flow by like water in a stream, steady and inevitable, Patricia and Travis aged together with grace and gratitude. They watched their children have children of their own, saw their grandchildren grow and learn and begin to find their own paths in the world. The ranch passed into Thomas's capable hands, then eventually to his eldest son, keeping the Calloway legacy alive and thriving. They never left Texas, never felt the need to return to the places they had come from. This was home, this land they had worked with their own hands, this life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. And when their time finally came, many years after that fateful meeting in a boarding house kitchen in Saint Elmo, Colorado, they faced it the way they had faced everything else. Together, unafraid, grateful for every moment they had been given. The story would be told for generations in the Calloway family, of the mail-order bride who had been rejected as too plain, and the cowboy who had seen her true beauty and loved her for it. Of how they had built a life and a legacy together, proving that real love had nothing to do with appearances and everything to do with seeing and being seen, knowing and being known, choosing and being chosen, day after day, year after year, until the very end. And somewhere in heaven, if such places existed, Patricia Dawson Calloway and Travis Calloway walked hand in hand through endless golden grasslands under infinite blue skies. Still together, still in love, their story complete and their legacy secure in the hearts of all those who came after them.